Hello and welcome to the AVForums podcast for the week of 10th of July 2013. It's week 2, episode 2, and we have yet another podcast covering movies, games, tech and home cinema. I'm Phil Hinton, editor of AVForums, and joining me on this episode are AVForums games editor Mark Botwright.
Evening, Phil. I was using that 30 seconds to try and think of something.
You just being ironic then.
Postmodern
by actually saying what you were told not to say.
Well, if everyone else is going to be original, then technically evening is original then.
Well, just to bring the listeners up to date, I did say to the guys, please don't say good evening, Phil. Think of something else. So, also here, news editor Mark Hodgkinson.
Hi from New Orleans.
Audio reviewer Ed Selley.
Watcher.
And AVForums assistant editor Steve Withers.
Back by popular demand.
Kicking off this second week of the podcast, the magnificent spectacle that happened on Sunday, we're recording this on Monday, was that Scottish tennis player Andy Murray finally got the monkey off his back, and he also won Wimbledon. Well done to Andy. I don't know if anybody else watched this.
Yep,
sure.
Watched every
did.
agonising minute of it.
I watched that last set again last night. It was the worst second time round. It was awful.
Well, I actually watched the highlights as well, and at some point you thought he was going to lose the point.
Yeah,
even though
I
you knew he won.
He's going to lose. He's going to lose.
that last game.
Yeah,
20-something
I never
minutes.
know anything like it.
4 championship points, and you thought if Djokovic manages to win that game, he would have crumbled, I think. So yeah, he dug deep and got there. But the reason we're also going to talk about Wimbledon is the whole 3D sport angle, and the BBC put out the semi-finals and the finals on the HD Red button, but in the same week that they did that, they've also said that they're going to put a hold on their 3D experiment for at least 3 years due to lack of interest on the public's behalf. And this follows news about 4 weeks ago, Mark, about ESPN in the States also shutting down their 3D sports channel at the end of this year. So, not a good sign for 3D on TV.
Well, no, it's looking like almost a lost cause. There's really only Sky now that's propping it up in the UK, and you've got to think they'll be watching what the others are doing, and well, it just doesn't look good. I mean, they'll be doing the numbers, I guess, at Sky. If they're making enough on subscriptions against what they're spending, then they'll continue. But you just can't see it. If the BBC are up in sticks and ESPN's pulled out, then it just looks very, very bad for them.
It's interesting because Sky, about 5-6 weeks ago, it used to be that you had to have the full package with them to get the 3D channel, but they've done away with that now, so you actually get the 3D channel on any of the packages, which is a sign that they're struggling for people to watch the content, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I think that 3D was pretty much dead when it launched, in the home at least. I mean, Avatar was December 2009, so 2010 was a big sort of peak in terms of attendance at the cinema for 3D movies, things like Alice in Wonderland. And then we went to CES in January 2011, and it was just all 3D, wasn't it, Phil? Everywhere you looked, it was 3D this and 3D that. By the time those TVs hit the market in the middle of 2011, people had already got bored of 3D. It was already starting to attendance numbers in the cinema were already on a decrease and heading below 50% compared with 2D screenings by the time the TVs actually launched.
Yeah.
So I think, from that perspective alone, they never had a chance, really. And the fact is that what little 3D programming has been available, and I've watched some of the BBC stuff, like Wimbledon, not this year, didn't bother this year, tried it last year and the year before that when they first did it. And one of the problems was the coverage was rubbish in comparison.
Well, it's just limited camera angles.
They've only got a few cameras. They had a really low camera angle in order to take the most advantage of the added dimension. The problem was at that low camera angle, you couldn't see what was going on.
No, the other side of the net was a mystery, wasn't it?
I had no idea what was actually going on in the match. So I mean, I also watched some of the I tried to watch some of the Olympics in 3D, and again, the build up to the 100 meters, there was just one camera pointed at the track. There was no sort of film segments. There was no real build-up. There was a completely different commentary team. I turned back and watched it in 2D because the coverage was infinitely better. So, I think there was a number of issues. a number of factors that have caused basically the death of 3D, in my opinion. But in all honesty, it was dead on arrival.
So they estimate there's 1.5 million 3D TVs in the UK homes, and the BBC were getting as low as 5% for 5% of those 1.5 million for content they'd spent a lot of money on, like the Mr. Stink and a couple of other things. I mean,
they're still committed to the Doctor Who 50
that's the finale,
special, which will be in 3D, but that'll be it then. And I guess we'll see it again in 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, it was telling a line that actually appeared on, of all places, on a comedy website, but there is a grain of truth to it. Actually, more than a grain of truth, it's a provable fact. In the US, there is the sobering fact that more people bought Paris Hilton's last album than have watched a 3D broadcast on their 3D television. And if that isn't the very definition of plumbing the depths, I honestly don't know what is.
It doesn't get much lower than that, does it?
No. And, when in many ways the BBC stopping it, in many ways it's sort of irrelevant what Sky do now. ESPN was another, paid sort of subscriber exercise. When the free-to-air broadcaster has knocked it on the head, I don't know where you can grow interest from. I mean, let's be taking on board all of the stuff we've just said about limited camera angles and all the trying to make the most of it. In other words, play on the gimmick. The bottom line is that the source of free 3D has now been knocked on the head. And I don't think that bodes well for the long-term sort of survivability of the format.
When the manufacturers were bigging it up, and let's face it, they bigged it up big style. For at least 2 years, everything was just 3D. One of the things that they tried to push, which made a lot of sense, was 3D gaming. And they made a big hoopla about, this is going to be the future of 3D. This is where 3D really works. And when you watched demos and you played with the games that were available, yes, it added depth, and you could see why they thought it was going to be the next big ultimate thing for 3D. But Mark, it's kind of fell on its face, because I don't think, certainly in the gaming world, anybody's really taken by 3D.
No, I think it's one of those things. I mean, we've been pretty slow on the uptake of HD as well. So, I mean, even though the consoles pushed that, we're still seeing a lot of games that are well below 1080p. I mean, one of the reasons why no one's really talking about 4K with the next gen consoles set to come out is because we're still waiting for solid 1080p 60 frames a second, which was something that we were promised 7 years ago. So this idea that 3D would suddenly come along and would be perfect, it was a grand idea, but when you've still got games that have got kind of screen tear and low resolution textures and the like, there were lots of other problems that needed kind of uniformly ironing out before you got to the kind of little garnish that was 3D gaming.
Very little mention of, or probably no mention of 3D at E3 launches, was there?
No, it just
I can't remember it mentioned once.
It's just slipped by. I think, though, it is that classic case of great technology that, at the end of the day, I think pretty much everyone had exactly the same view, which was as soon as they saw the glasses, they kind of went, I'm not going to bother.
Yeah, that's it, Mark. I mean, I think the manufacturers are so caught up in the technology and whether they could do it, they never actually bothered to think whether they should do it. Yeah, well, most people don't want to sit at home wearing a pair of glasses. Basically a pair of sunglasses in the lounge.
Or in my case, 2 pairs of glasses.
Me too. I mean, it's less of an issue if you actually wear glasses, because wearing a second pair isn't that noticeable. But if you don't wear glasses at all, it's actually quite a big step, I think.
And I don't think it's that the technology's bad, Steve. I mean, you were banging on about 3D for...
No, I'm not knocking the technology. I said the technology is amazing, but nobody wants it. I love 3D. But on a big, I think also, to be honest, 3D's impact is significantly diminished. Even on a 65-inch screen, it's not the same as on a big screen, either at the cinema or if you're lucky enough to have a very large screen at home, like a 10-foot screen. Then 3D still has a lot of immersive impact. Once you get down to a 50-inch TV, it's like looking through a small window, and it's just not the same. And I think that hasn't helped either. You can list a number of reasons why 3D's failed. Poor quality content is definitely an issue too. Too many post-up conversions, not enough actual native 3D content. Mostly the 3D films tend to be ropey, sort of B features and low budget stuff. It just hasn't been handled very well. You had a different not exactly formats, but different approach to delivering 3D, which I think confused the consumer to a degree, passive and active. I think to a large extent, passive seems to have won over just for simplicity. I mean, the glasses are very cheap and they're easy to use and they haven't got to be charged or put batteries in them, and they don't have flicker. But even on the active side, it took them 2 years to get together and actually come up with a standard, rather than having different types of glasses that didn't work with other people's TVs, which obviously annoyed the consumer as well. So there's been multiple reasons why this hasn't worked. But I think ultimately, no one really wanted. No one was that bothered. They were happy to go and see the odd movie at the cinema in 3D. But I think no one was really that fussed about having it at home.
You then have to look as well, when you talk about the cinema, they were charging you extra to go and watch a 3D film. So, the cynic in me says it was all about money, and I think the cynic's right. I think they saw this as a money spinner. You could tell that just by the billions that the CE companies spent on R&D and getting these TVs out to market, probably a lot quicker than they really should have got them out to market, because, as you say, the content just didn't exist to start with. And with these TV experiments now finishing and only Sky being available, it's they're going to have to lick their wounds, basically, because, as you say, nobody wants the technology. And it's not that the technology is not good, it's just that people don't want... I don't want to sit in my house with 3D glasses on, because every time you have to get up and go and do something like take a toilet break, you got to take the glasses off, you got to pause, you got to go... The main thing is you got to go and get the glasses to start with to sit down and watch something. Yeah. Whereas if you're in couch potato mode, you're just going to watch... You don't want
to be watching it in daylight either. So if it's something like Wimbledon, you're having to draw the curtains on a beautiful day. Really, it doesn't seem right. Really.
Yes, that's a good point too, actually, Mark. It was I mean, it was just quite amazing, wasn't it, Phil? January 2011, it was nothing but 3D at CES. By January 2012, almost no one was talking about it anymore.
Nobody was talking about it.
It had died in its first year. That means in 6 months it was already dead in the water.
Well, just look at the stuff that we've been to this year just for product launches. Nobody's spoken about 3D at all, even though the majority of TVs which we've seen this year have 3D built in. And they'll continue to have that because they spent too much money not to have it as a feature on a TV. But it will just be a feature on a TV. It's not going to be anything else. The technology is great. People are also saying, well, I'm going to wait till we see glasses free 3D. So
there's not much incentive now to develop that, is there?
Not really. And we had a closed door demo at CES this year with TP Vision, who... the public face of TP Vision is the Philips brand. They showed us something that they were working on, which was glasses free. And I've got to say, to start with, being used to the Toshiba thing where you have to stand in exactly the right place, with your head exactly still to get the 3D effect, this worked a little bit better. You didn't have to be exactly in the right place, and you could move your head and you got the 3D effect, but... there was loads of other issues with it, Steve, wasn't there? There was lots of line twittering, there was lots of things that just looked really odd with the image. And, of course, they were showing us CGI animation. They didn't show us any properly shot 3D stuff. And it was really difficult to make or give an opinion on that. What I will say is if people are waiting on that technology, good luck.
It was better than I was expecting, in all honesty, especially after experiencing Toshiba, which was shockingly poor. But having said that, you're right, Phil. It's not there yet. It could be a long time before they get there. And the cost involved in what they were having to do is use 4K panels, even though the panels they were using could take a 4K
how much
feed.
will it cost?
Well, yeah, it's going to be incredibly expensive. And is it really worth it when no one cares anyway? It certainly isn't worth spending. I think people would rather have what we're about to start talking about in a second, which is a high resolution format. I think that's just an easier sell.
The other telling thing is, how many 3D products have we had through this year for review, and the manufacturer hasn't even bothered to put 3D glasses in the box.
Yep. I'm currently waiting for them to send me some glasses for projector. A projector whose main selling point is the fact it does triple flash 3D, and they didn't even send me any glasses.
Just as an aside, are you sure, confession time, that it hasn't been to another journo who may not have been the world's most conscientious reboxer?
That never happens.
I don't want to condemn our entire profession here, but every now and again I'm wandering around my listing room and I find a constituent part of something which actually went back several months ago.
I've had lots of things like sweetie wrappers and lipstick at the bottom of the box and loads of other things, but
no, I think it was the manufacturer, or rather the PR company, to be fairly honest. But I mean, it's taken them 2 weeks to find a pair of glasses to send me, which says a lot.
Yeah.
When the manufacturer doesn't have any, you're guessing there's not a massive amount of demand here for them.
So just in case people take us the wrong way, we're not down on the technology. The technology works when it's done right, when it's set up correctly.
No, absolutely.
On a big screen.
I love it.
It is a good experience, and it even works to some extent for games and so on. So there was a possibility of it taking off. The thing is, they're going to get this into the living room anyway now, guys. When you buy your next TV, it's going to have 3D on it. There'll probably be some glasses in the box. I guess it's a case of whether there's then a demand once they get the numbers up. It's 1.5 million at the minute, Mark.
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
Once that gets nearer the 10 million, will people be more interested? Will they start asking for content? Maybe it's not completely dead, but for this moment in time, certainly the BBC and ESPN have pulled the plug on 3D on TV. And also at Wimbledon this year, it wasn't just 3D. Steve alluded to it, higher resolution, 4K. Sony were there. They were running 4K experiments, filming certain games and courts. They didn't film the whole thing. They only picked certain courts, certain games to cover with their UltraHD cameras. And they were showing the results on UltraHD TVs at the venues. But while they're doing that, and they are launching their UltraHD 4K TVs in the market, the 55-inch and the 65-inch X9, which hopefully we'll get through for review soon. They've also turned around and said that they're not going to launch their 4K player or the 4K streaming network that will be available in the US. That's not coming to the UK. So I guess they don't see a market for it just yet in the UK, Mark.
Well, I guess it's a bit of a kick in the teeth, isn't it? They're selling these 84-inch TV. You really want some native content on there, and I was quite shocked by that, to be honest. No plans whatsoever. They could have, given us something to bite at and said it, maybe in a year's time or something.
I find it quite disconcerting that Sony aren't, releasing the 4K player and the 4K download service in the UK, because I kind of assumed that was going to be part of the rollout for the PS4. And I am, it's kind of thing. Well, if you want to sell these 4K TVs, you really need to provide some 4K content. I mean, haven't they learned a lesson from 3D? Lack of quality content, no one's buying into 3D. No 4K content, people aren't going to buy into 4K. When HD was coming along, even though it was a long time between the TVs first going on sale and them actually being content to watch on it, you knew it was coming. I mean, there was HD DVD in the pipeline, there was Blu-ray in the pipeline, there was high-def broadcast in the pipeline. It was all definitely coming. It was just a question of time.
Sony's service was about it, really, wasn't it? That's all we got. So
so brilliant.
Samsung have come out this week and said that they see Ultra HD mainstream by 2017, by which mainstream means, interestingly, 5% of the total market. So that's when they expect to see content come in. Maybe Sony are looking at it the same way and just think it's not worth the investment of the infrastructure over here or in Europe, because we're about the quarter of the size. Is it something like that? Quarter of the size of the US market anyway? I don't know.
Well, you're going to have the Blu-rays, made for 4K, so you can upscale it. That's what it's going to be.
Well, that's what's worried me.
That's
there's an awful lot of total BS being shoveled here, and there's a very large part of the tech media are shoveling it for them, about things like, mastered in 4K. Every bloody film's mastered in 4K. If it's shot on 35mm, is inherently in high resolution already. To say that is just misleading to the public, and it's the same as when they used to ship those super bit DVDs, with the higher bit rate. It was just a way of trying to sell products. And what they're trying to make people think that they're buying something that's 4K. It's not. It's a Blu-ray. It's just a normal Blu-ray like any other Bluray.
The thing is, people are aiming it at that. Probably the clued up ones anyway. So it's a churn. We see it as churn, and nothing more. But
then you also read this week or last week that they were talking about their current ultra high definition TVs, which obviously have HDMI 1.4, which can only accept 4K at 24/25 out of 30 frames a second, which is not necessarily going to be the standard in the future. In fact, I guarantee it almost won't be. It'll be 4K at 50/60.
Or more. They're pushing for more, aren't they? They were 120. It's kind of EBU territory.
Already you could buy a TV that's it's going to be redundant in a year or two. Well, when's HDMI 2.0 coming out? So early next year. Probably next year's round of products will happen. Yeah. So within a year, it will be redundant. And Sony's claims about, there'll be an upgrade path, I guarantee it won't be cheap.
Well, that's it. You're going to have to pay for any upgrade. It was in the detail because there wasn't any detail when they put that press release out. And I've seen a few articles from other outlets making a big fuss about this. And like you say, Steve, if it's going to be an upgrade, it means that they're going to have to take a board out and put a new board in. Ain't going to be cheap. And why would you buy one of their TVs if they're now saying to you, well, next year it might not work with any content that then becomes available?
I can give them a sobering story because I bought the VW100, the Ruby, when it came out, which was one of their first, I think it's the second 1080p projector they did. I couldn't accept 24 frames over HDMI. So I was stung on that. You'd think, given it was Sony and they were developing Blu-ray, that they would have had that in the specs, but nope. I had to buy a scaler to scale up to 48 frames a second and then use DVI because it could accept 48 over DVI in order to get around that problem with Blu-rays, which was a pain.
Don't you think this is the kind of thing that ultimately dampens people's enthusiasm for this new technology? I mean, we've already seen 3D basically fail because no one really knows. Someone goes into big electrical retailer and someone says active or passive, and they just go, what? I've got to wear glasses. I've got to get something else. I've only just programmed the universal remote. Now I've got to add something else that I've got to think about. And just it's all these extra little bits that ultimately the technology gets rolled out. The technology is there. It's good. But it's just this strange little war between the different manufacturers. They want to get it out first. But in doing so, they kind of jump the gun and ultimately just end up putting off the end consumer.
DVD. The one time they got together and buried the hatchet and actually put, all pushed behind one format. Most successful, electronics launch in the history of electronics. The one time they did it. Every other time there's infighting, backbiting,
But that's because there's lots of money to be made. If you hit on the format which then the public take to heart and start buying, like JVC with VHS, that's what's kept JVC going over the decades, was the fact that it was their format and it wasn't the best format. The best format was Sony's Beta, but it was VHS that won out, and we all know the reasons why that won out at the time, and that's what's kept JVC afloat. And God love them. I mean, we like JVC, we'll love their products, but I know that the UK guys are always having a faceplant because someone in Japan or someone in the marketing department is saying that their latest projectors, which have eShift 2, are 4K projectors. They are not 4K projectors. It doubles the resolution in the projector, but it's still a 1080p chip, and it won't accept 4K content, and certainly the output is not 4K. Yet we've already seen companies like JVC, like Sony saying masters for 4K and so on. It's causing confusion. Like Samsung with LED TV, there is no such thing as an LED TV, but it confuses the market.
That's gonna bite them in the arse when OLED finally does come to market, in my opinion.
So, this is the problem when you get a new format like this. And I was excited for a long time about 4K. I'm still excited about it, but I'm starting to have, second thoughts now because I can see where things are starting to move and where companies are starting to move. We had the opportunity to have high bit rate, to have high colour depth, so higher than 8-bit colour, a wider colour gamut, as well as the resolution jump. But it seems to be that everything at the minute is towards the resolution side of things and not what could make it an excellent format. Maybe there's politics there. Maybe the film companies are saying, well, hang on a minute, we don't want anything more than 8-bit in that resolution going out to the public because of piracy and that kind of thing. But it just seems to be that there's this perfect opportunity, and there always is with new technology, to make it really, really good. And for some reason, mainly money, and mainly because people want to come up with their own formats so they can coin in licensing and all the rest of it, it all goes to shit.
I can follow that up, Phil. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's inevitably what happens, I think. And if anything, if the history of CE is towards anything, is that the abilities of the manufacturers to cock things up can never be underestimated, can it? And
I guess, Mark, the same is very true with gaming. I mean, the opportunities have been there to make games outstanding in terms of graphics and outstanding in terms of resolution and frame rate and so on, but for some reason the politics get in the way.
Yeah, I think it's a question of who they're actually marketing them to. Everyone kind of falls over themselves to try and actually find a way that they can kind of qualify using certain buzzwords and the like. I mean, we're seeing it now with the Xbox One and this idea of cloud computing and the like, and as if it's a new idea. It's the kind of thing that, sadly, I just think at the end of the day, it will end up putting off the key customers, which is the mainstream market. I mean, you can kind of aim towards the tech crowd all you want, but they'll either see through it or they just won't buy it. But the mainstream market, if you confuse them too much and you just throw all these kind of buzzwords out there and you try to say this is 4K when it isn't, and as you've just said about kind of LED TVs and the like, when something does finally arrive, they're not going to flock to it because they're going to say, well, isn't that the thing that's already been out for half a dozen years already, and we've already seen that it's not that great?
I think that's one of the reasons, actually, Mark, why actual 3D gaming hasn't caught on the way everyone thought it would, because for years they've been calling games 3D, hasn't it? They were, they had three-dimensional graphics, but weren't actually in 3 dimensions, if you know what I mean. So I think there's a lot of people going, well, hang on, isn't this game already in 3D?
Yeah, the 3DS didn't help.
Oh yeah, it didn't.
Yeah, but and again, that's 50-year-old technology that's using.
Yeah, it's not great, but again, it comes down to this question of, can you market it? The question of should you market it is completely different, and one that never seems to be able to be asked at the highest levels.
I think with the rollout of UltraHD's got the problem there. So many things have to align, so the technology has to align, and then the broadcasters have to be there, and there's just got then the retailers, and it's all got to fall into place. And there's just this sense it's just being rushed. I know we'd like it fast, but a bit like 3D, and then 3D's fallen flat, so they need something, as we were saying earlier. They need something to launch and to coin it in, and it's just seeming a little bit rushed and a little bit fractured at this time.
It's being driven by economics and not by technology. They should really be sitting down, thrashing out a standard for everything, getting all that agreed now, and then launching it.
It's not like there's not standards bodies out there that are already doing this. So, why are the manufacturers not listening? Why are the film studios not getting involved? You need to get everybody round the table, slap them all over the face with a wet fish, and say, right, get sorted.
Yeah.
And anyone listening to this podcast who's thinking of buying a 4K panel at the moment, don't. My advice is don't. Sit back, wait.
Sit it
at
out
least next year until the EBU and the ITU have thrashed out some standards, until the studios have all backed it, until maybe the Blu-ray Disc Association have come back with some kind of standard for a disc format. Until all that's been agreed,
that would be the game changer for me.
Yeah, until all of that's been agreed, or hopefully agreed, you really don't want to be dipping your toes into what is still a very, if you're paying $4 or $5 grand for a TV that could be redundant in a year. Despite what Sony might be saying now, I don't believe them. I think that'll be tough luck. So wait for HDMI 2.0 to be shifted into products. Let's see what comes out in IFA in September, and obviously at CES in January.
That's the subject of 4K and 3D. I'm sure we're going to come back to it in future podcasts. But let's move things on and let's go to Steve. Because Steve, what's at the cinema?
Well, this week, Phil, I have mostly been watching Now You See Me, which opened actually last Wednesday, which is unusual because usually they open on Friday, but they opened last Wednesday. Is a thriller about a bunch of musicians. It stars Jesse Eisenberg, who's kind of made quite a cool transition from being uber geek to being relatively cool in this film, actually. But it's got him, Dave Franco, who's the brother of James Franco. You've got Mark Ruffalo, Woody Harrelson, who's always good value. In fact, the whole cast is excellent. There's Michael Caine in there, Morgan Freeman, Isla Fisher, and they're all very good. They're quite charming and pleasant, and I think that really helps with the film. But basically, they're a group of magicians who a mysterious person gets them all together. They become known as the Four Horsemen, and they kind of have this big show going in Vegas. Like the Chris Angel kind of shows. You've probably seen adverts for the film when we've been there for CES. There's big illusionist shows, but during one of their shows, they rob a bank. And then Mark Ruffalo and Melanie Laurent, who was the girl in Inglourious Bastards, the French girl in that, she plays an Interpol agent, and Mark Ruffalo's an FBI agent, and they're trying to work out how they managed to rob a bank in Paris from a show in Vegas. And Morgan Freeman plays a debunker, a magic debunker, who gets involved trying to advise the FBI in terms of the investigation. And there's another sort of show where they do something else, and then a thriller plot starts to kick in, and there's lots of chases and stuff. It starts off actually opens with a magic trick, a card trick to the camera, which is really good. And you kind of think, oh, great. There's actually quite a bit of illusions in it, but a lot of it looks like it's faked and CGI rather than being genuine in-camera illusions. There is some magic in it, but probably not enough magic as I would have liked. Having said that, it's fantastic fun. It's basically a thriller, lots of chases, lots of very cool effects, great cast, very funny at times. I actually thoroughly enjoyed it. But if you don't go into it thinking it's going to be The Prestige, basically, if you're trying to compare it to The Prestige and think, which is, purposefully deconstructs the magician's art, then it isn't that. It's more like, whilst The Prestige is about magic, this is more about like the kind of big flashy shows you get in Vegas. So you imagine the film is like a flashy show. It's directed by Louis Leterrier, who did Clash of the Titans and Transporter 2. It's fast paced. The camera's constantly moving. The camera's almost like a participant in some of the shows because it weaves around the stage so much. But it's just a great 2 hours. It's very exciting, good fun, very funny, lovely cast. I recommend it thoroughly. I think if you want a nice fun 2 hours at the movies, you can't go wrong. And in fact, this year's been pretty disappointing in terms of a lot of the films that have come out, films that I've really been looking forward to that have let me down. So at least, I'm quite happy to sit there for 2 hours and be entertained, and I was thoroughly entertained.
So Ocean's 11, but with magic. That's basically the premise.
Yeah, that's actually not a bad. That's actually a good pitch.
You'll like it. You'll like it, but not a lot. But you'll like it. So that's
actually looking at the poster. It is just like Ocean's 11's poster.
I'm trying to work subliminally.
You see, I haven't even seen the film yet, and I could tell it just by the pitch that you gave there, Steve. Remember to breathe as well. So, just to wrap up on the movies, what's coming soon?
Well, at the cinema next week, we see Pacific Rim, which is Guillermo del Toro's new movie about giant robots and giant monsters. That opens on Friday, so that'll be this Friday. And in terms of Blu-ray reviews, as Simon mentioned last week, Cloud Atlas is coming, which I recommend strongly. There's Identity Thief, a comedy with Justin Bateman and I've forgotten her name.
I have to stress that if we were talking about this, as far as I'm concerned, this would be comedy in inverted commas. I honestly thought it was about as funny as Drowning, but
Oh, you saw it, did you?
I for my sins, I saw it at the cinema. So yes.
What are we talking about now?
Identity theft.
I wish I knew, Mark. I wish I knew what we were talking about.
There's a review of Runaway Train, Oz the Great and Powerful in 3D, and The Evil Dead. And I guess who'll be reviewing that one, I suspect. We also just got up Chris's epic 7,500 word review of The Howling.
So let's move on. Let's go gaming. Mark, what's the latest on the new console news?
I suppose, a couple of the big, well, not really big stories, kind of the things that slowly kind of eke out that now that Microsoft are trying to play things a little bit more quietly, they're not putting their executives in front of interviewers quite so much. One was the kind of confirmation that Japan will be an, in quotes, tier 2 country, which basically means essentially they should release the Xbox One at some point there in 2014, and by and large it sounds like they've pretty much given up there, which is conceding defeat, and obviously shows they are putting all their eggs in one basket, in that kind of US shaped basket, and hoping that they can integrate it into every living room there. But another couple of little things, which was there's a game called Fez, which has been a long running dispute with the makers of it, where they were going to get charged to patch it, so to fix the game. They were obviously against this. Microsoft have long had this policy that, in fact, if you charge for patches, because obviously it takes, it's something they have to build into their infrastructure for online connectivity, but also it stops people rushing out games and then just deciding to kind of hit a release date and release something in half-finished fashion. This, though, was a case in point where the makers said, well, we don't want to pay. If you want to draw people to your console and with an exclusive, then you should, make it free for us. There's been a lot of talk about the Xbox One losing out to the PS4 potentially with regards indie developers, because they're going to block self-publishing and charge for patches. And the news is that Fez will get patched now. So the hope is perhaps this is, another quiet little U-turn where Microsoft are looking at their restrictive policies, and perhaps it means that you might see things like DayZ, the Arma 2 mod that's currently on the PC, that kind of thing, actually transfer to the Xbox One as well, because the chap who's made that, Dean Hall, was talking that he did want the ability to self-publish, and you had to be able to release updates and patches whenever and free of charge. They're having this little kind of reshuffle. There's lots of talk about, with Don Matrix moved on to Zynga.
Yeah, he'd gone this time last week, hadn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's lots of talk there, reshuffling behind the scenes. A lot of people are kind of quite worried that they'll drop in someone who's just, this kind of Windows-shaped ball buster who'll just kind of, crush any kind of creativity.
As long as Steve Ballmer's not going to be the face of Xbox One, then it's got no hope if it's him.
No, but I mean, I think it's at least a one small little sliver of hope that they're seeing the error of their ways, and they're in a period of self-reflection. If in the 6 months coming up to a launch, now's the time when they really need to kind of nail down their policies for the coming 6-7 years.
I'm actually swinging back a little bit towards Xbox One now since that PS4 news and the 4K. Quite upset with Sony right now. See, I'm not a true gamer anymore, Mark. I'm in it for the features. Bring on the Xbox One.
Yeah, but what is a true gamer anymore?
I don't know.
There was research come out. Was it this week about the average age of the UK gamer and the like? I think it was something like 35.
25, single.
No.
Lives with his parents.
Found dead at his
I
desk.
think that's gone now. Really, that idea.
that was a surprising thing. I think it was something like 35 and about 23K.
Well,
no.
There was news that pensioners are now one of the fastest growing sectors of gaming.
All the Candy Crush on
Candy Crush. I mean, even my mum is playing Candy Crush on Facebook.
But this is the big kind of hurdle, which is whenever these surveys come out, they usually make out like it's some kind of groundbreaking. The age is going up.
Yeah, it's gone up from 34 to 170.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is that gamer no longer means what it used to mean, which was someone who would play hours and hours a week. If you play a game, you go into Facebook, you happen to play 10 minutes of a game, you've played a game, you are therefore a gamer. In the same way that everyone reads, everyone's a reader, but you don't poll people about who actually reads anything each week. The idea that somehow it makes you a different breed of person because you happen to have played a couple of minutes of Angry Birds on your iPhone or something. I think it's a kind of defunct concept now. It's pretty much accepted that there will be this very wide demographic.
Mark, do you see the likes of smartphones, tablets, and then the Android consoles that are going to hit the console and the like as a threat to Xbox One and PS4 sales numbers? Do you think it'll be the money will just be split too thin?
I think that's exactly the reason why Microsoft are going for this idea of one console, input one integration, because, you're going to slowly see at some point a box. I mean, you can count.
Well, all the Windows 8 apps will just shift over, won't they? You'll be able to download, presumably, Windows 8 games onto the console. Would you think?
I would assume as much. I think it's that idea of what Apple have shown, which is monetizing small micro games and the like earns you so much more than spending $100 million building something for 5 years to release. When
I downloaded a Real Racing 3, an E8 racer from a Nexus 7, and it's free to download, and it's a pretty polished game. It's good fun. And then it's the microtransactions, and if you don't decide to pay that, whatever it is, 50p to do something, then you have to wait 2 minutes. And if there's two things need doing to your car, it's £1. And I can see how they make the money for the impatient. If you just want to get on with that game, you could spend a fortune. You seriously could.
Yeah,
of course, I'm really tight, but I just wait.
Yeah, it's everyone's looking at these kind of different economic models, because the fact is that releasing a console at £400 when you're in a time of
£60 a game, £55 a game, whatever they are.
Exactly. During a global recession, it just doesn't seem like a sound strategy going forward that you can do that ad infinitum. We've all got boxes under our TVs, multiple boxes that can Netflix and iPlayer and all these other things that you can already put kind of apps on things, and you've got smart TVs. It's all about what's going to be that kind of portal to all those small little slivers of content. If everyone wants to be that one box that you order your pizza from, that you call a taxi through, and that you rent the movie through.
I mean, it is interesting. You look at WWDC, which happened at the same time as E3. And Apple were saying that they've paid their developers, their app developers, now that's not entirely games, but their app developers, $10 billion in royalties. And now a high percentage of them is games. If you go to App Store, the most popular stuff is the game applications and so on. So a good chunk of that 10 billion must be going back to the games makers. It's a huge platform for them. And if they can do the same on Android, like you said, is there going to be a need for these consoles under the TV, another box under the TV where as tablets get better, as laptops get better, as mobile phones get better and faster and more memory, faster chips, do you need the console?
You can throw a game from your tablet to the modern TVs. Some of the top of the range TVs, you can be playing a game on your tablet and just chuck it on the TV and play it there. So you've got 1080p. It's not the same as a full-on console, straight PC game, but still, you've got a limited amount of gaming time. You might have 10-15 minutes. It might be ideal. Okay,
so before we move on, we have the Games podcast coming up on Sunday. So, Mark, what kind of things can we expect in that? He says, turning his page.
Yep. Well, on that, we will be discussing, he says, quickly opening up a browser. Just bear with me. Right, this month we'll be discussing Double Fine running into a bit of trouble with Kickstarter, Love Film perhaps phasing out game rentals and the ramifications of that, and looking at what we've been reviewing. Probably a big one will be The Last of Us, and that's the one that everyone's really been talking about, and perhaps looking at a bit more zombie action with The Walking Dead 400 Days downloadable content.
Just remind me, my Last of Us hasn't arrived from Amazon.
It's great, the ending.
Already played it.
Yeah, tell me the ending. Go on.
So I did it a week ago.
To wrap up on this week's podcast, Mark published an interesting story on the front page about soundbars. It is one of the fastest growing sectors of the audio market at the moment. And who can blame people for going out and buying soundbars? Because, let's face it, guys, we look at every new TV that is released during the year, and very few of them have decent sound. Very few of them sound very good because they're so thin and you can't get around the laws of physics, Ed. So let's go to you first. Why do TVs sound so bad, and why should people start looking at soundbars?
Well, we have had this conversation. It's a personal hobby horse of mine. Essentially, the general public was asked, with no other caveats to this question, would you like a thinner television? And it's like, well, how could I possibly not want a thinner television? And the question that possibly should have been asked is, would you like a thinner television at the expense of it not having room for anything else except the screen? And they might have gone, well, hang on a second, does that mean it will sound like a 1950s radiogram? And the answer is yes. So we've got these incredibly complex and incredibly good televisions out on the market at the moment. And by and large, looking through Stephen Mark's reviews, it's an exciting day when any of them make it towards being adequate.
I think we actually do get a bit carried away when it is. I think relatively that's excellent.
And I don't know about you, but adequate doesn't blow my frock up over much. So effectively, we're at the stage where if you simply want to get anything close to, say, the sonic performance that we used to accept out of the whacking great 32 and 36-inch CRTs, you are looking at an external speaker system of some description. And the soundbar market is now sort of fairly strung out. So we've got at the bottom end of it systems which are literally offering little more performance than just that, getting you back up to the level you might have expected from a well-sorted CRTV 10 years ago, which sounds terrible when I put it like that, but is broadly speaking the truth, all the way through to much more sophisticated and capable offerings which are ambitiously and in some cases with some justification, offering the alternative to a full-fat 5-channel system with AV receiver. So, I mean, there's a huge, when we talk about soundbars, but we are talking about a sort of £2,000 spread, all told, when we take some of the more esoteric examples into being. And within that, the sort of net result, the net driver is because most modern televisions sound unbelievably bad.
And there's a convenience factor, isn't there? They're easy to accommodate. You can just lay them flat on the rack and you're done, really. Quite tidy. I mean, quite tidy as well.
The other thing, obviously, when you're dealing, I mean, we've been tracking the increase in average screen size, not the sort of thing that we're going for as enthusiasts, but finding its way into an average lounge. A couple of years ago, it might have been a bit of a stretch to have a sort of 3-foot long speaker blend seamlessly into a lounge. But when the screen is 3 feet wide, it's of no consequence whatsoever. It's
42s that do 32 as far as this.
It's a completely sensible item to add to the list. And these things are combining, and manufacturers are, I suspect, really hoping for a perfect storm here of these factors combining to really drive the market. Because, I mean, we've discussed in previous podcasts, AV receivers they're certainly not a growth area. Niche. And we could we could make a cogent argument for them being at the end of the line. So this could be the next big thing. So I mean there's a huge amount of potential in the market.
Steve, I'm picking up on Ed's points there. The other big plus point for soundbars, and let's get rid of some of the myths now. I mean, Ed mentioned at the beginning there that some soundbars are only getting you back up to sort of CRT levels, but there are some fantastic sounding soundbars nowadays that come with subwoofers, whether that's wired or wireless, and they look good. So one of the biggest hurdles for any enthusiasts that are in home cinema, or anybody that wants to get home cinema, is the other people that they live with, whether that be a partner, wife, whatever. It has to fit the living room. It has to look nice, and that's one of its big plus points.
Definitely. I mean, if you start from the initial conception that almost all televisions sound rubbish these days, then you need to find some solution. And that's with the best will in the world. Getting 5 or 7 speakers into a lounge is never easy, regardless of who your partner is, or even if you live alone. You might not want to do that. You may not want to have a lounge with speakers all over it. So the soundbar, not only does it improve the quality of the sound of your television, but obviously it's a quite simplified, and attractive solution to that problem. Now, not all soundbars are created equal, of course. There are definitely, I mean, we've reviewed quite a few soundbars now, and I can speak from experience that there are some that have been very well thought out. I mean, I guess because they've been in that game a long time, longer than most, I was particularly impressed with Yamaha's soundbar because they seem to have thought of everything.
Yeah, I got to admit, reading that review, I was thinking, that should be everything was off the checklist. Brilliant.
Yeah, and there are times when we reviewed soundbars, for example, where the connections are in the subwoofer, which means you can make the soundbar tidier and easier to install on the wall, for example. But it doesn't mean that you're limited in where you can put the subwoofer, which kind of limits how much you can smooth the bass in the room. So that's one. And now with the Yamaha, all the connections were on the soundbar. Now, obviously, it was a lot bigger than some of the soundbars, but I have noticed a worrying trend now. Certainly, I've seen a couple this year that have got really small and thin. It's like, well, no, that's just going back to the problem we've already got with the TVs. Don't make them small and thin because they're going to sound rubbish again. So you need a decent sized soundbar. Now, there is the other extreme, of course. There was the Golden Ear, which wasn't really, in my book, a soundbar. I kind of define a soundbar as something with built-in amplification and a matching subwoofer and some connections.
It was a Trojan horse center speaker.
Yeah, it's a big center speaker.
To get you to buy the rest of the kit when you can afford it.
It sounded great, but at £1,000, then you have to go and buy all the amplification to go with it. It's kind of calling it a soundbar was slightly sneaky, I think. But I quite like the soundbars. There are a couple of soundbars, certainly Samsung do this, and I know Panasonic do it as well, where the soundbar can be either a soundbar, as a traditional single bar, speaker beneath the TV, or it can actually be turned into 2 stereo speakers if you wanted that sort of wider stereo separation. So there's lots of interesting solutions out there. And as you say, Phil, they are both convenient and relatively straightforward to install, and obviously attractive and less imposing than an AVR or a sort of a 7 or 5 speaker, all-in-one system that you might buy, which includes obviously you've got another box with a Blu-ray player and amplification in it. People. And let's be honest about this. When I say people, I usually mean girlfriends and wives. Aren't always that keen on someone stringing speakers all over the.
Hey, what about boyfriends? Come on, let's not.
Or
be sexist.
Boyfriends, yes, no, although, but yeah, they are. They provide an easy, relatively cost-effective, in most cases, some certain notable exceptions, cost-effective and simple and elegant solution to the inherent problem that most modern TVs sound rubbish.
So, Mark, you put a story up on the front page, AVForums.com. What have you put in that story to help people along if they decide that soundbar is the way for them to go?
The benefits of having HDMI, which brings with it audio return channel, which simplifies things a lot. It's more of a convenience thing rather than a sound quality issue, because you can carry all the bandwidth you need from an optical cable. We looked at just different price points, the ability to have even a smart soundbar these days. You can a connected soundbar where you can access online features, video on demand, that kind of stuff. The flexible solutions, as we alluded to before, the soundbars that can disattach and become separate. And they're just a general overview, really, of what's out there.
I think wireless subs and wired subs are quite cool. Wireless sub obviously gives you a great deal more flexibility in terms of positioning it, as long as it's not also being used as the main connecting point for all the HDMI. So if the connections are on the soundbar itself and the wireless
they're almost all wireless this year, aren't they?
Pretty much.
Packages.
Yeah, that obviously gives you a great deal of flexibility in terms of positioning. Obviously, you do need a power socket to plug it into. But
talking about wife-friendly, I reviewed the Paradigm Shift soundtrack.
You can't say that.
I've got a wife.
Sexist.
I've got a wife. She's this is a real life story. She actually said for the first time ever, "I like that subwoofer. It was attractive." So that's a win, isn't it? I like that subwoofer.
How have they made a black box attractive?
It does look nice. It's like a leatherette finish to it.
Oh, right.
Very attractive. Some nice.
So more suede. That's what we need.
Yeah, it's a nice looking. It's a bit like a land speeder from Star Wars.
This is one thing that, I mean, we're laughing at this, but the custom install boys have been doing this for years, where you could have leopard skin covering on your speakers, or put your own designs, even match the wallpaper on the speakers and so on. It's only going to be a matter of time before the big CE companies and the sound companies like Yamaha are going to get on board with that as well, and cotton on and think, well, if they can sell it to clients, we can come up with some fancy stuff to, what's the most popular wallpaper or wall covering to make things look nice, Ed?
Well, I mean, there's a sense that actually, in some regards, it was sort of been tried before by various Japanese manufacturers at various times, and it feeds neatly back to what we were talking about with 4K in miniature. It's launching the wherewithal to do so before anyone was interested in doing it, had the wherewithal to do it, or there was any other company supporting it. But yes, we've already seen conventional box loudspeaker manufacturers. Admittedly, a little bit further up the price point, they're offering the ability where you can order your speakers in any Pantone shade that's commonly available. It's just a slightly longer lead time. I think for soundbars, it's going to be difficult to offer it quite as flexible as that, but they might want to take learn a lesson potentially from Peugeot, and it may be the only lesson they ever want to learn from Peugeot, where you could buy that horrible one with the little one with the sliding doors that had the get up and go of a Glacier. You could change the dashboard trims. You could go to your dealer and say, actually, I fancy a completely different color, and you could pop different rings, trim rings around the bits of the dashboard, and I think you can now do the same with the Audi A1.
You can do the same with Citroen. Citroen are now doing that with the DS line. You can specify whatever colour you want.
Well, there you go. You see, that's if you
Hang on a minute. Aren't Lerv already doing this with soundbars? You can get in different finishes.
Well, and that shows
yes,
how much of a cave I've been living in. But if you keep the basic chassis the same and you're just changing pop panels, it's a practical and very intriguing proposition. Because if the model becomes a strong enough proposition and the manufacturer in question isn't absolutely obsessed with keeping everything under one roof, you could then see third-party suppliers starting to provide more interesting finishes that the manufacturers themselves might not take a punt on.
I guess it kind of comes back to what we were talking about with the AVRs. Steve, you raised the point that every AVR looks the same, and that's always been the case. It's a big black box with knobs on. One of the suggestions you came up with was designer. Make it more designer, make it more appealing, make it more so it fits in with the living room. And now that sound bars are going that way, we're going to see manufacturers start to offer all different kinds of customization as well. It could be a resurgence for that area of the market.
Yeah, I think there's one thing that's become quite apparent over the last few years. People are far more conscious of their lifestyle and their living environment than I think have ever been in the past. I think most people now are, have become quite lifestyle conscious in terms of not just the look of things, but also the way that they're interfaced with those products, or the way that they integrate into their living space. It's all become very important, and for things like soundbars and even more so AVRs to survive, they need to realise that fact and adapt to a changing environment, and definitely soundbars have the potential. I mean, it's already a huge market. It's growing every year. They have the potential to really, given their simplicity and inherent attractiveness, that they have an opportunity here to really tap into that new lifestyle conscious consumer.
Okay, well, that is all we got time for this week. That wraps up the podcast. My thanks to Mark Botwright, Mark Hodgkinson, Steve Withers and Ed Selley. Thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Cheers, Phil.
Thank you, Phil.
Evening, Phil.
That was a thank you, Phil, there, Steve.
Don't forget you can keep up with the latest news, breaking news on the forums. That's AVForums.com. If you want the latest in gaming news, views and reviews, the Gaming Podcast is live on Sunday. That's Sunday the 14th. And don't forget, you can also follow us on Facebook. It's facebook.com/AVForums. And you can also keep up to date on Twitter at AVForums. This is Phil Hinton saying thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next Wednesday.